Hello, friends. Welcome to Nexus, a smart buildings technology podcast for smart humans. I'm your host, James Dice. If we haven't met before, I write a weekly newsletter on this same topic. It's also called Nexus. Each week, I share what I've learned, my opinions, and what I'm excited about in the quickly evolving world of intelligent buildings. Readers have called Nexus the best way to stay up to date on the future of this industry without all the marketing fluff. You can check it out and subscribe at nexus.substack.com or click the link in the show notes. Since starting the Nexus newsletter, many of you have reached out to me wanting to talk shop, and we have. After a few weeks of those wonderful conversations, I realized I needed to record and share them with our growing community. So here we are. The Nexus podcast is born. This is our chance to explore and learn with the brightest in our industry together. One more quick note before we get to this week's episode. I'm a researcher at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, otherwise known as NREL. All opinions expressed on this podcast belong solely to me or the guest. No resources from NREL are used to support Nexus. NREL does not endorse or support any aspect of Nexus. Episode 16 is a conversation with Brad Pilgrim, CEO of Parity, Inc. Brad breaks down the application of smart building technology in multifamily residential buildings, including how that's different from other verticals and why it's such a unique niche. We unpack Parity's solution for that space, which, as a longtime resident in multifamily buildings myself, sounds like a perfect product market fit. Brad shares how the pandemic has changed residential energy consumption patterns and why that has actually driven more demand for the Parity solution, and much, much more. This episode of the podcast is directly funded by listeners like you who have joined the Nexus Pro membership community. You can find info on how to join and support the podcast at nexus.substack.com. You'll also find the show notes, which has links to Brad's LinkedIn page. Oh, and by the way, if you take a look at your podcast feed and you're missing episodes 10, 12, and 14, that's because those episodes are exclusive to members of Nexus Pro. Sign up for a Pro membership now to get your personal podcast feed with access to all the episodes. Without further ado, please enjoy Nexus Podcast Episode 16. All right. Hello, Brad. Welcome to the Nexus Podcast. Can you introduce yourself for everyone?
Yeah, James, thanks for having me. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Parity, Inc. We're a constant commissioning platform for building HVAC systems with a concentration on energy management, CO2 reduction, and data and analytics. I spent about 5.5 years in 2 different energy startups, one based in the US in Utah. The other one was a Canadian company, solar company that ended up buying a piece of technology in South Park, San Francisco, and ended up expanding into like 32 states. Were acquired by NRG. So great company, got to work really closely with a lot of the founders, learned a lot about startups, and eventually found myself on the consumption side of the energy equation. And that's really where Parity plays.
Got it. Yeah. So can you take us through the founding story of Parity? Like what led you to start it?
Yeah. So I guess Parity started out of somewhat of a personal need. You know, working in the solar industry really opened my eyes. Like the very first solar company really opened my eyes to like what I really wanted to do, having a bigger purpose, being able to get up in the morning and have meaning. I won't go too far into the backstory of that, but I think the bottom line was I moved to Toronto. And I was living in a condo, and it was actually my friend's condo, and he moved to Hong Kong, and I was staying in his condo, and they had a special assessment then. And you know, in a condominium in North America, they're usually structured as nonprofits, so all revenues to maintain the building come from the residents within the building or the owners within the building. So I had this special assessment done, and the fees were going up by like 18 to 21%, and I was like, wow, that seems like a lot. You know, I knew that I had actually invested in condos, and I knew that sort of the name of the game was like keep those fees low because that's a big part of your cost of owning a condo. You know, very different than owning a home, but you know, in comparison, actually more sustainable. So you sort of have your mortgage and then you have your condo fee. I'd say on average, you know, a condo fee represents about half of your mortgage, but in this case, it was like inching up to like 3/4 of what I knew the mortgage was, and so very high cost per square foot for maintenance. And so I got curious and I said, you know, like why is that, right? I didn't know a lot about reserve funds, energy budgets, the way that condos were managed. So I went to an AGM and then I eventually ended up getting hold of the budget. I knew how to read through a budget and a balance sheet. And the realization that I had coming to the industry was the energy line, so the utilities line in a condominium's operating budget was like 35-40% of the budget. And that was gas, electricity, and water. And, coming from, again, the energy industry, I knew that there was technologies that made HVAC systems more efficient and could make pumping more efficient. And I knew variable frequency drives and the potential of them. I thought that every single building must have a standard operating system, right? Like there's no way it just has an on switch. So, sort of diving into it, I asked the poignant question. I said, what have we done as far as energy efficiency? And the answer I got back was, we've done everything we can. We've changed our LEDs. And I think by that point, I was like, got it. Okay. So your understanding of efficiency and energy optimization or efficiency is LEDs, right? Which is sort of like that classic like light bulb moment, right? Everybody understands a light bulb. It consumes energy at 60 watts. If you install a 15-watt LED, it's obviously less. The math is simple. So that's really what started this whole sort of, I embarked out onto a research journey. And then the second sort of key milestone was when I think I was reading actually an NREL paper, but I came across the statistic, 40% of CO2 emissions come from buildings. And right there, I was like, okay, like, I think I found something worth sort of diving into. And anyway, so fast forward, I actually ended up meeting my co-founder. He had years of experience with heavy equipment, was also a senior partner at a large Big Four consulting firm here in the GTA, and just a wealth of knowledge, definitely bringing the tech brains for everything. I was bringing more of the business, sales, financial side of it. But, over the course of 6 months, we worked together to really identify the opportunity that, Parity is currently addressing and start out the company. And yeah, that was like 3 years ago. So it's been an incredible journey. And, I probably don't have all the time on this podcast to go through that. But yeah, that's really sort of how we got started.
Cool. I can totally relate to that story, having owned a condo and having had assessments placed on me personally, very annoyingly. You don't plan on those things and they just happen and you really have no choice to pay them, right? It's just like, within the next 6 months, you will pay this payment and you don't have much to say about it. Yeah. So I definitely understand how that works. I can also understand like wanting to scratch your own itch because like that's what Nexus is. So solving your own problem is like often the greatest reason to start a company because you're obviously intimately familiar with it. So yeah, so I want to dive into the platform in a minute, but I thought I'd ask, like, with you being kind of a startup in the smart building space, I think one of the relevant questions for someone like you is like, how are you attracting talent to a startup in this space, especially tech talent? Because I think one of the things I've heard from tech companies, especially new tech companies, is that it's hard to get, say, a young person that could go work at Google or Facebook to, decide, hey, I really want to tackle this smart buildings thing. And I think once they do get started in our industry, they're often scared away because it's a mess and our technology is 20 years behind. And like, it's a really difficult, really juicy problem. And I think that's what attracts me to it. Cause I'm like, this is an amazing problem. And it's, there's so many layers, but how are you getting people to take that plunge and say, I want to solve this problem with my career?
Yeah, it's a good question. Starting out, it wasn't, the so-called sexiness of the HVAC, energy industry that drew me towards it. It was, in fact, the problem. And what seemed like, especially in the vertical that we're in, a very difficult problem to solve. I thrive on that. I probably landed a lot of places in my career because people said either it's too hard to do or you can't do it. So that's sort of what got me really interested in it. Was this looks like a challenging problem and a lot of people have said they can't solve it. And I think that actually is what a lot of, I'd say, younger entrepreneurial type, gig economy type people are looking for is, there's actually been numerous sort of papers and articles out there on like, what are people looking for, the youth looking for in today's sort of working environment. And I think there's a bit of a stigma of like, people think startup and they go like, oh, you're all on like beanbag chairs and, you all drink all day long. And there's this, really ever flowing youthful culture in the startup world. And, I won't say that that's not completely untrue, But, I think as startups have grown from, the days of building a lot of things in a garage to people learning from those lessons and understanding that, you can build startups sustainably if you have the right team and the right people in place. We have that as a core value is we really cherish and sponsor and support innovation and people that want to really break the status quo, be market disruptors. And, and it's just a culture of playing, right? Is we want to be able to bring people on that feel, they're the top of their game. They want to be pushed further, but they want an environment to share those really innovative ideas that they may not share in other places, and then try them, right? So get an open environment to actually try them. It's something we encourage is, try things. And it's, things are going to go wrong, but, it's okay if you do it in a controlled environment. You sort of have to take the shots if you want to figure out if you're going to make one of them. But how that translates to attracting new talent, it's purposeful. We're not attracting, hundreds of employees. We're not trying to, right? It's we're on a growth curve probably to double our employees in, say, the next 12 months. So go from a team of about 35 to about 70. And a lot of our talent exists in, obviously, engineering. That's mechanical, electrical, HVAC or mechatronic, and obviously development, so computer science and computer engineers. But, I'd say on the whole, they're really interesting problems that we're solving. And through the work that we've done with a collaboration with Ryerson University's building science team, we're collecting a ton of data and having that data usable in a way in a really unique domain, and having the models built to be able to build machine learning algorithms. That's really interesting for a lot of people. We find that from an engineering perspective and from a development perspective, people really want to dive into that and learn more. Like AI is a very new industry. And I think when people think about AI, they generalize. They may not understand that AI is actually this big umbrella, and there's all kinds of AI underneath it. And, AI existed in things like Excel spreadsheets, right? Google Maps, a decade, from an if and else statement all the way to a reinforced learning algorithm. These are all classified as AI. So I think between the purpose of what we do, which is obviously addressing, CO2 emissions in urban centers or making urban living sustainable, having an open environment for people to, test theories and do modeling and maybe do things that they wouldn't be able to do at larger corporate companies, but also having something really interesting to play with. I think all of those things combined, and then obviously with a very good leadership team, sort of the established, senior executive team, people want to work for people that they look up to, that, they have a lot of interest in and they respect. So I wouldn't say it's one small thing. It's probably a combination of, finding everything that attracts those people and trying to create an environment of continuous learning and development.
Cool. I love that answer. It's like, obviously it's not just the sexy tech. Obviously it's not just the team. It's everything. So let's dive into kind of the problem you guys are solving. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was because I don't, besides living in multifamily buildings for the last, 15 years, ever since I moved away from home when I was 17. I've been living in apartment buildings, right? So in different cities, but I don't know that I understand the problem from a professional standpoint. It's more just like living in these buildings and not giving a whole lot of other thought to it. So how are, multifamily buildings, and how is like specifically the analytics world, analytics technology, what are the ways in which that's different from, say, your other sorts of commercial buildings, hospitals, offices, that type of thing?
Yeah, it's a very big question. So I'll pick a couple things out of it because I think like you and myself, when you move away from home and you want to move into a big city, the likelihood of you buying a house or renting a house, it's probably quite low probability compared to moving into a condo, right? That combined with cities obviously discouraging urban sprawl and building up, and that becoming more economical, and the construction industry finding innovative ways, to build faster. I think that's really why you and I have probably both landed in condos. But it is funny, you move into a condo, even most people that buy a condo, they have no idea how the actual structure of the company or the corporation works. Me being a good example, move into a condo and, special assessments done. like, what's a special assessment? And it's like, yeah, you get a budget and you're like, oh, there's a budget. Like, right, that makes sense. Sure, there should be a budget. And then you find out like, oh, there's a board, right? Oh, I didn't know there was a board. How do you get on the board? And then you find out it's like a bunch of volunteers and you're like, wow, there's this whole company going on in this thing that I'm living in. And I have to share it with, 500 to 1,000 other people. And, one of the big nuances to condos is it's sort of like a house, but 500 people living in a house. So those 500 people are all responsible for the mortgage, the cleaning, maintenance, the energy costs, mowing the lawn, shoveling the driveway. And those are things you don't think of from at least a cost and operational perspective when you move into a condo. I think most people think of it like a hotel, right? You move in, someone's taking care of that stuff, which I think one of the concepts behind condos is you don't have to worry about mowing the lawn, shoveling the driveway, right? It's part of the benefit that comes with it. So, from that perspective, just an overall understanding, it's very different. And I feel that, again, a lot of people that move into them don't really understand that. From a organizational structure perspective, condos and co-ops are the vast majority of the time, they're nonprofits. So nonprofits are structured in a way where all the fees to run the nonprofit are coming from an internal source, right? So in this case, in a condo, it's the 500 people living in the house. And really what that means is if you and I and 500 other people who, at least in respect to Parity, 500 other people who probably don't know energy as well, don't know HVAC systems, energy efficiency, maybe understand that, again, roughly 25% of their condo fee is actually based on energy, water, or cooling, heating, movement of air. They understand that there's a way to manage that, right? It's sort of an afterthought. I think if you're not in energy, it's even really hard to understand your energy bill. If the solar days really made that pretty evident to me talking to homeowners about their energy bill. And they're like, I just have no idea what it says, right? Mm-hmm. I know another number. I have to pay that number if I want to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
So that's, again, it's a really unique aspect of condos. And I'd say lastly, the economics in a condo are structured in a way that it's really like the least amount of dollars out of everybody's pocket, right? And I mean, from a costing perspective, that is the way that you want to look at it, right? I want to put the least amount of dollars out every single month to maintain my asset. The problems that come with that are you may not have the most, say, pragmatic team looking at those problems and maybe better ways to solve them. It's really just keep as much money in the owner's pockets as possible. That doesn't leave a lot of room for innovation.
And long-term thinking probably too, right?
Absolutely. And that is, I'd say, one of the biggest barriers or challenges in the multi-res sector compared to the commercial or MUSH sector is that in the commercial sector, largely driven for-profit corporations, usually lots of building management teams or building operators, usually full-time. That is the benefit you have with a for-profit. You can include that into a costing budget and obviously base your profit or your leasing costs on that. Usually room for large engineering projects. The decision makers in those companies are obviously much more focused on energy, engineering, net operating income, and those people generally will come from the engineering world, financial engineering world. And so that's the type of customer that you probably want to be in front of more times than any. They understand it. They've done their research. The conversations are fluid. The value is very immediate. So, those sort of two things is, you're dealing with a very qualified, interested person on the commercial side or the MUSH side. And on the multi-residential side, you're dealing with someone that has a different problem. And I think that those are the two really big aspects that differentiate the multi-residential world from the commercial or MUSH market. From an energy perspective or a behavioral perspective, I'd say they're unique in their own ways. But, the fact that 40% of CO2 emissions come from buildings really makes you think everything that, you go into that's not your house, it's a building. So if someone was to go from a condo like you and me to an office building, we're in our office building from probably something like 9 to 5, and then we're in our condo from 5 to 9. So the energy consumption patterns are quite unique if you actually look at what it's like to live in a condo and compare that to an office. But almost makes exact sense, right? You usually get up every day at the same time in your condo. You shower at the same time. You leave for work, or maybe you work from home. Everybody eats generally around lunchtime. Everybody cooks generally around 5, 6 o'clock. And that just repeats in perpetuity. So in a condominium, you really see this highly predictable pattern. And I think in the same in offices, right? And it's what I believe has made the commercial industry much more ripe to adopt these types of solutions. You know, your office is open 9 to 5. The other hours of the day, you can basically turn a lot of things off, right? It's just not being used. The trick in condos, and I sort of go back to when I moved into a building, I didn't think they just had an on and off switch. But the way that property technology, or I'd say real estate technology, hasn't developed for a myriad of reasons, legislation, incentive, it has left buildings in that on-off state. So the analogy I like to give is, buildings sort of run like a light switch. It's pretty much, right, they're built for peak, so they have to assume everybody using all of their equipment at the same time. So a lot of the common area systems are going to be sized for that. And with the lack of adoption of control, building management technology, better software, a lot of those buildings have been left to their own devices. And, so it's sort of this self-fulfilling perpetual problem that just keeps going on. But I think what that's allowed companies like Parity to do is really identify what is the problem for the different types of stakeholders in these markets, and how do we build a really compelling value proposition and find good product market fit, and really just focusing in on a very narrow market and a niche has allowed us to develop a significant footprint and learn, I'd say, a lot more about our particular customer so that we can service them better and build a product that is actually very conducive to what they need.
I love that. Yeah, there's just so many things that are different about that. So we've had on the podcast, there's been several similar types of technologies, but they're all focused on different verticals. And the way that those technologies are applied are going to be totally different, like you just said. Just like the simple, if you're just talking about control sequences, for instance, a typical office building is going to have that 9 to 5 schedule, like you said, and they're going to have morning warm up and cool down. And it's all going to be based around that Monday through Friday. And we'll get into the actual product in a minute, but do you guys get into, is it just condo associations that are your main clients, or are you getting into multifamily buildings that people are renting from one company? Or what is your approach there?
Yeah, so, multifamily as an umbrella is really, multi-unit dwelling, MURBs, MRUs, 1,000 acronyms for them. But what we concentrate on is not so much the type of the building, it's the type of the customer. So as I said before, your home is, I'd say, a lot more sensitive than your workplace. So in a commercial building, I think the tenant concerns are very different than in a multi-residential building.
Okay.
Or a multi-use building. You might be able to deal with a temperature you might not be able to control at your office throughout an 8-hour day, I don't know, by putting on a sweater. Maybe you complain about it once or twice, but in the end, you feel, I'm not enabled to actually change that. But in your home, it's like your safe place, it's your fiefdom, it's to sort of be in your own environment. And all those things are really important to you. You are at home, you want to be comfortable. It's probably what's driven the adoption of like smart thermostats, right? It's like everybody wants that type of control in their home. But it's also like, again, it's your safe place. And if you own it, it's likely your greatest asset or greatest investment. So you want to be in control. You don't want to not have hot water at some point. We're in a commercial building, maybe that's acceptable. You want the temperature or the availability of cooling to a temperature that you want or heating to a temperature you want to always be there. You probably don't want anyone limiting you from what you can do in your own home. Where, again, compared to the commercial or a mush industry, you probably have a bit more leniency. In condos specifically, we deal with independent multi-residential condominium corporations, and we deal with rental groups or large real estate owners. And in both of us are very aligned, right? We're all concentrated on everything that the customer needs when they need it. So the way that we look at that, and really part of what parity means, is that optimal supply and demand ratio of never wasting energy or delivering too much to the building, but also at the same time, when demand increases, being able to react to demand and supply those utilities to a building. But a lot of it is really about having the control and ability to supply or not supply the critical utilities to be able to show energy savings and efficiency, and meet demand and use different demand indicators and different algorithms to understand when a building actually needs something that you may be trying to save on, and vice versa.
Okay. Yeah. And I imagine part of that is, in the commercial world, there's this concept of tenant comfort, and now it's becoming like tenant health and kind of growing into that whole, virus mitigation concept. But I'd imagine the tenant concept is different if it's someone's home. Maybe the bands are smaller on the tenant comfort. It's like, if I own this unit, I want to be able to control it to exactly the temperature that I want to control it. So kind of getting into the platform a little bit, I think that's a good kind of jumping off point. So maybe just explain the concept of the platform first, and then we can kind of get into like whether you're able to do anything with the tenant spaces or not. I feel like that's like a line in the sand that might be difficult to cross. But yeah, can you kind of just talk about what the platform does and how you explain it to these condo associations?
Yeah. So I enjoy this question. This is actually where I'd say we're quite unique. So in comparison, again, to a commercial versus a multi-residential, commercial buildings will usually have a building manager or a building facility manager.
Right.
In a multi-residential building, you may have a superintendent. More times than not, you'll have a superintendent. There's products built for both verticals, right? One will enable a building manager or a facility manager to be able to do their job better or help them do their job better. The other vertical, there is none. There's no one to actually use that tool or be able to implement those changes that some platforms are recommending. It's uneconomical, unfeasible. There's no one there to manage the project. There may be a knowledge gap.
I could not imagine like the condo boards that I've been served by. I cannot imagine any of them being like, I'm going to go log into the analytics software and like manage the building, right? They don't have time for that. They're just like you and I, where they're just like, it's a volunteer thing. They just need something that can kind of work on its own, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that was the biggest identifiable problem, was that we'd really love to be more energy efficient. We don't have anybody to do it. The classic providers of that technology were, you look at the big bricks and mortar HVAC companies, Carrier, Johnson, Honeywell, Siemens, Schneider, all massive. They've all been producing these pieces of equipment and executing in a big, big way. Obviously, they're huge companies. To, I would say, largely the commercial and mush markets, right? That's where they play well. That's where their service offering really resonates. Not that there isn't overlaps in the multi-residential as far as big equipment, but I think as an overall like service offering for a customer, they really left a big gap by just not understanding really what that customer needed and how their business is organized, or a corporation, a condominium corporation is organized, and what that good product market fit is. Generally, you won't change a product that works for 90% of the market just for that latter 10%, assuming that you probably won't get the full market adoption of that latter market. So really, what do we do differently? We offer an energy efficiency as a service. So instead of offering an analytics platform or a new control platform or a better way for your building manager to manage their system, we offer it as a service, where I'd say 50% of that stuff is done autonomous by developed, customized algorithms that we basically program in place that replaces say a 20-person engineering team being in your building all the time. And I will say, as far as technology or sort of the availability of energy savings in HVAC equipment, there's three parts to it, but fundamentally there is a point of diminishing returns. And you probably have to really understand that. And something we dug into really hard when we started and said, where are our assets best allocated and our resources in our company? And in the end, we understood what is achievable, what's within our capability, and at what point is there a point of diminishing returns that maybe right now we don't want to invest in. So, figuring out where our technology, fell into the categories of like super high performing, sort of high performing, and maybe low performing, we said, we think we're going to be a high performing company because we understand how systems work in buildings and what the availability of energy savings and reduction are on the whole for the large majority of people, or the large majority of the problems. And that's really what we focused our platform and the savings algorithms that we use on, was getting the biggest chunks out first, but more of our resources were concentrating on making sure our customer was satisfied, and that they are always first. So we have a very customer first focus because we deal with people in their homes. And if we ever put ourselves in their place, that's the way we want to be treated. So we treat our customers like we would treat ourselves. And I'd say that's predominantly what we build our energy efficiency as a service offering around, was that type of customer.
And so, well, let me kind of explain what I think I understand about the platform is that it's a supervisory control solution partly, where you're pulling in data from any sort of HVAC system, like you mentioned, Siemens, Schneider, Johnson Controls, whatever is already in the building. All of the condos are being served with maybe hot or chilled water from the central plant that is probably not a lot unlike traditional, more commercial type of building systems. You're pulling in data from that, and then the system is orchestrating with supervisory control sequences to optimize that, right? Is that a good way to understand it?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, across the board, most companies that are doing this, we're all working off the same building blocks.
Yeah.
I think that was probably the statement around, we understood that our technology, as it was, 2 years ago, it really covered off reliably a lot of the large pieces of, value in HVAC energy savings and optimization that we wanted to. We saw a path to incrementally increase it. And, in parallel, we are doing that. But we didn't want to invest a bunch of time into something that, again, made those incremental changes where we said, we think we just need to be able to understand our customer better. But yeah, a lot of what we do it's a supervisory layer. We're hardware agnostic. We like that because we can basically tie into any type of equipment, any piece of machinery. It allows us to address a lot more buildings than maybe some other people who only play with certain types of proprietary equipment or deal with certain providers of equipment. Yeah, that was one of the big pieces, we concentrated on early days, was saying, how do we get the most for the most amount of people, and obviously continue to build that innovative technology, but overall is, finding out, does that product do everything that it needs to do for the customer?
Yeah, and our core readers of Nexus on the blog side will be sick of me talking about advanced supervisory control, but it seems like I need to write something about how it especially plays well in this market. I think they're sick of me talking about it at this point, so maybe I'll wait. I'll wait a few months. So that's kind of, like you said, that's like 50% of it. The other half of it is this concept of as a service, or I guess the question would be, what is the other 50%? Where is it like your team kind of hand holding these condo associations in the energy efficiency journey? Is that the other side of it?
So I'd say partially yes. There's the way we approach a new customer or a condo is, again, we put ourselves back in their shoes. We're condo owners. A lot of us here, we live in Toronto, we live in condos. And we sort of just say, like, if someone presented us with this type of product, what would we understand? When we started out, in the condominium industry, we started with commercial buildings. We started with schools. And it was a bit different because it was like, yeah, there's lots of competition and this is the kind of product we need. And, we were looking at it from a condominium perspective going, that's really unique because, like, those aren't problems that condos or people or rental owners have. They have, most of the problems come from the tenants that are in their buildings. So how do we build a better product for those people? So we said, what are the biggest problems that they need to overcome? One was obviously cost, access to capital, various bylaws, restrictions in nonprofit organizations that don't necessarily allow you to borrow lots of money, finance long term. So we said, okay, how do we solve that problem for you? The other one was, again, you and I, if we were on a condo board and we were volunteers, we're consumers, right? So we like consumer products, right? We really like how they're marketed to us. We really like how we understand them. We get all the nice things that consumer products offer. Example, I ordered something, a couple weeks ago from online, and it was, guaranteed refund if it doesn't look like it does in the photo. I only had to pay for half of it when I ordered it. And like, those are all things that, like, we like, right? It's like, yeah, I like those things. Those fit our market. And so we sort of said, how do we build a product that actually fits this consumer type B2B, B2B2C customer And really those were the big things. Was we don't have access to capital to adopt this technology. Everything we've heard about the technology, there's been a lot of big claims in the past, a lot of promises made, and not a lot of them seen through. We don't really understand what's going on. We're just told that it's happening. From an energy efficiency perspective, the classic way to look and see if something worked is look at your bill the next month. There's lots of problems associated with just doing that. But I think overall, from a consumer perspective, energy efficiency hasn't built a product that really focuses on serving what a customer needs, which is guarantees, data, education, really consumer friendly looks and feels, and sometimes just a person on the other end of the phone that can relate to what they're going through. Companies like Ecobee and Nest, right? They've nailed that with the smart thermostat, where we've had thermostats for like 100 years, but it took a very long time for someone to say, why doesn't anybody use these things? Right? It just didn't work. And that's really the same journey we're embarking on, is really understanding like how do we build a better product for the type of customer that really needs the solution.
Cool. That's really cool. I think my last question around the platform would be, like, I think I heard you on a different podcast talking about the types of AI that you're using, and earlier talked about the umbrella. So could you kind of clarify, this is one of my favorite questions, by the way, is like, can we start to cut through the buzzwords a little bit and like talk about what types you guys are using and how you normally talk about that, or do you talk about it?
Yeah, I'll answer. It's a bit of a two-part question. We don't talk about it a lot, especially with our customers. It's not something that it's not something I think even to us as consumers is as important as it may be to someone that is looking for that edge. I think up until recently, and maybe even still, it scares some people. There's been instances of some of the most advanced AI doing things that we never predicted it doing, and frankly, I mean, to me, if you ask me what gets me excited, it's artificial intelligence. I think it's I've said this probably in every conversation I've had, is like, we have just rubbed away the condensation from the window. We're not anywhere near the potential of what is going to happen in the next, say, 5-10 years. It's going to be incredible to see. But from a customer's perspective, it has very little weight. It doesn't offer me anything better. It sounds like there's a possibility of something going wrong really bad. So we don't really market it. That being said, there is some seriously robust technology behind what we do, from an engineering perspective on HVAC systems, but also from a machine learning perspective, deep learning to be more specific, with the data that we collect. In a deep learning algorithm is to sort of delineate, AI goes from an if and else statement to linear regression, multilinear, supervised, deep learning, reinforced learning. And obviously the more complex models you can develop, and once you start getting into neural networks, I mean, you can get right down to quantum computing. But again, what is that point of diminishing returns right now? And so, yeah, through our collaboration with the Ryerson's building science team, we've developed 2 or 3 deep learning algorithms that really allow us to do things like forecasting, heat loss calculations, but do it in fractions of a second every single minute. And those are the important gains that you're going to get in the technology, but somewhat being expected by a consumer. I expect my Google Maps to know absolutely everything. That's just how we're built. But there is actually some seriously advanced machine learning behind those layers. But when you see Google Maps, no one says AI Maps, claims that there's an artificial intelligence driving it, because to us as a consumer, we just come to expect that the technology is at a level that it is delivering what we want as a consumer of that product. So, again, largely what we do are anywhere from linear regression, multilinear, all the way to heating and cooling systems, largely have much more advanced systems tied to them that are in continuous learning, supervised, albeit, but continuous learning.
Got it. Cool. So let's shift as we kind of get towards wrapping up here. Let's shift over. So it's what's today? August 13th. We're still in the middle, in the US at least, in the middle of this pandemic. And I mean, one of the things that is relevant to our conversation here is everyone's spending a lot more time at home, right? So I have to imagine that the load profile of the average condo building has changed quite a bit. And so what have you seen, and what have the implications been for your clients there?
It's a really good question. I have to say, when we started the company, part of our linchpin was condos have done the same thing for 100 years, right? They always have the same occupancy level. People are creatures of habit, right? They leave every day, they come home, and on average, that all varies out to the exact same behavioral data points. And then a pandemic. The first time, since I don't even know if we had condos in 1918, but it's like the first time in 100 years that we've had this unprecedented shift from us going to offices 9 to 5, being out at our workplaces, coming home at 5 o'clock, waking up. So it was wild when it happened. I was like, this is the first time in history this is actually being done. And of course, we built a whole company around this thesis of always do the same thing. So it definitely put us in a spot where we were like, what does this mean? Have we, was our timing way off? Is this going to change the mindset of customers or path of parity? And then some really strange and good things started to happen. What we did notice is, because what we do is we look at all systems and we try and use demand indicators in a building as data inputs to supply algorithms. And there's some really unique ones that we use. What we noticed was, even though there was a lot more people home a lot more of the time, and you could probably say there's a combination of this all landed in shoulder seasons. And for everybody listening, I think they'll know what a shoulder season is as far as energy and HVAC. But it did land in shoulder seasons. But the big component of the pandemic, and I'd say that the biggest change, is water. And water is one of the fastest rising utilities across North America right now. But everybody's washing their hands a lot more. Yeah. We saw crazy water increases. And I guess just to bring that into context, water is a capital fixture utility. It gets consumed by toilets, shower heads, faucets, sprinkler systems, all of which are hard to control through digital controls. It's much more of a capital fixture consumable.
And it's owned by the individuals, not by the condo association or the apartment building.
Yeah, in most cases, but I'd say in probably 50% of the cases, it's owned by the condominium corporation.
Really? Okay.
So the condo corporation will pay the bill. They'll take that, they'll spread it out into the condo fee.
Right, because it's metered. Yeah, it's metered centrally.
Yeah.
I think what I meant is the tenants own the toilets, right? So changing out the capital there would be on them, or is that not true either?
That's true. Yeah.
Okay.
In condominiums. Now, there is actually, I should say, in most cases, it depends. I've seen both. I've seen where corporations will own the thermostat, fan coil, heat pump unit, toilets, and it's their responsibility to actually pay for it. I mean, in the end, if you sort of draw a box around this stuff, a nonprofit organization, they all make decisions together. No matter who ends up actually changing it, everybody that owns the asset eventually benefits.
Right. Okay.
So I wouldn't say totally a moot point, but when it comes to decision and dollars out, it's definitely more to the point. So again, one of the biggest changes we saw was water consumption, and it was immediate. So anywhere from 5 up to 15% immediate change, and those deltas on water are actually significant. Sort of never before seen. Hot water, obviously consumption. So I think it won't really matter where you are in North America. I can think of a couple nuanced places, but usually you're using a fossil fuel to heat your hot water. I'd say in probably recent years, the last 10 years, there has been a push towards electrification. So electric hot water heaters or on-demand hot water heaters, which again, it's a cost-benefit analysis that you have to do to make that decision. But from a CO2 perspective, it depends on what power market you're in, what the distribution of actual power production is like, to determine if that's a more efficient way or a carbon efficient way to produce hot water. But on the whole, hot water is heated by a fossil fuel. It's usually natural gas. So we did see a spike in natural gas consumption, obviously. But I guess the point I'm getting to is, overall, what we've seen is, because buildings have largely been way oversupplied, or sort of that analogy of giant on switch. They've just been running on. And it's for your listeners to better understand that. Imagine you drink coffee. I drink coffee. I probably have one at 9, 1, maybe 2 or 3, get over that hump. But if I ran the coffee maker 24/7, 365, just so that those 3 times a day it was there, hot and ready, which is really what we expect to happen. But having it run consistently and stay hot and ready and fresh, that's obviously, there's 99% waste. So that's sort of the analogy I use in buildings that are, maintaining a hot water temperature all day long, running their boiling system at 140 degrees, just so that when someone may want a hot shower, it's there, available and ready. very simple things, you can do with like a hot water is, you look at the return temperature on it. If you're sending it out at 140 and it's coming back at 140, probably a good indication, nobody's using it. So yeah, I mean, overall, to get back to my point, we saw a change, but it didn't change really the impact that we were having on buildings. Okay. And I think that's because we were still catering largely to the full supply and demand equation of the building. And although we did see changes in, people, an increase in hot water, an increase in water consumption, there's not really going to be a lot of change in electricity usage. Right now we are seeing probably larger than higher peaks in chiller usage because everybody is home. We've had some pretty hot summers here in the GTA anyways, or some hot days here. But I think probably what we've seen over the last couple of months is there is actually a lot more people getting back out, right? Okay. And being energy conscious. I think, a lot of the condos or the corporations we've talked to actually have, like announcements out to say, guys, we're home a lot more. What that means from an energy perspective, especially in a condo, is these costs are going to go up. We haven't budgeted for these costs. A condo sets a budget every single year. That's what dictates the condo fee. So if we're using 20% more in utilities, or a stark way to look at it is we're home 100% more of the time. So therefore, if that, applied in a linear relationship to the cost of utilities and the amount of money, that's a 2x factor on most things. So you would expect your, cost of gas to be 2 times, cost of water to be 2 times, cost of electricity to be 2 times. So that's what you expect to see. In reality, not everybody went home. Not everybody is using their cooling at the same time. Not everybody is showering at the same time. So on the whole, I'd say the impact was seen. It was visible. Again, ranging from 5 to 15% on average more consumption in things like water, gas, maybe electricity. But what this has done is, and speaking to the pandemic and this whole bubble analogy of like, make sure you're mitigating your risk, right? You wear a mask, right? Try and interact with, your inner circle or your, 10-person circle, as we've done in Canada. It's really shined a light on the advantages of remote control and, having the ability to do things like turn up air systems, change set points, problem solve from afar. Obviously, our clients that have an energy management system in their buildings look at it and go, they're very thankful. They're like, we're so glad we have this now, because it's going to be a huge cost mitigator next year when we have to go back and look at the budget and say, listen, we were in a shortfall because we were all using more gas, more electricity, more water. But having Parity in the building as a service, they know, and they can take comfort and have some peace of mind knowing someone's managing this for us the best they possibly can. So they're mitigating our risk the best they possibly can. And I think that's really shone a light in a positive way. And we've had a lot more, customers, buildings, referrals, a lot more excitement around the technology that we're actually providing in our market because of the pandemic. So, I think, as I said in the beginning, it's like we were like, wow, this is a first, like literally a first in 100 years. And we thought it would mean very bad things, but it actually turned out to mean a lot of really good things. And I think this is what this industry needs on the whole is it needs more education. More people need to be talking about the benefits of it. The adoption needs to happen in every single sector. There's room for people to play everywhere. And, I know a bunch of great companies that are addressing a lot of these problems in different verticals. And, I'm really excited for all of us because I think real estate technology is just, it hasn't developed like every other aspect of our lives. And so, maybe this is sort of a turning point for property technology.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly echoed in the last podcast with Deb Noller from Switch. She's basically said, along the same lines, seeing acceleration in building owners and their customers kind of shifting and making a big shift. So I think it's pretty awesome to hear that that's the same in your market. So kind of closing off here, I want to hear kind of what it sounds like you guys are doubling your staff. That might be one of the things you're excited about, but what are you excited about with the next maybe 6 months to a year for Parity?
Yeah, so we've expanded down into the U.S. That's really exciting, despite the challenges in COVID. We're a very remote focused team. When all of this happened and we were forced to get everybody working from home, we were able to do it in less than 24 hours. I think what we didn't realize was we actually operated virtually in an office. And we did that for various reasons. It keeps us flexible as a company, but it also allows us to build large networks of installers, large networks of finance providers, equipment suppliers. And we're really just like this engineering facilitating service in the middle that allows suppliers of all these great technologies and the people that have the skill sets to be able to install this stuff, and then us being able to pull it all together and create that good product market fit. So we act as that middle layer, and moving into the US, it's what really allows us as a company to move very quickly and reach scale. Is we're not relying on hundreds of people or lots of infrastructure or trucks on the road or techs out in the field. We know that those companies exist and those markets are hungry and they need new products, and companies like us to sort of break the way old things have been done and introduce new efficient ways. And that's what we're seeing. So, moving into the US, via virtually has been a big proof point around that, is allowed us to, without ever actually physically going to a building, we can spec, do a walkthrough, do a building energy assessment, work with engineers and installers to actually define this scope, understand exactly what needs to be achieved in the building, and then ultimately remotely bringing everything online. That's what I'm finding exciting. Obviously, the early days of that were much more manual, where you needed people out at sites confirming, when I click a button here, it does what I'm saying here. And it's really helped, build out our quality assurance process. It's just understanding, how do we deliver this quickly? Percentage done right, percentage done on time. How do we get those numbers crossing that, 95 to 100% mark? And again, moving into the US without being able to travel down there, it's really forced us to fortify a lot of those systems. And now that we're there and we're growing both domestically and in the US, I think it's a real testament to the capability of remote work and having remote teams.
And what sort of partners are you looking to sort of partner up with in all these local markets? Yeah,
so without naming names, we have partners from very large HVAC suppliers. We have partners that are property management companies, which we feel are very conducive to what we're doing. But in the US, we're already working with large rental companies in their multi-residential portfolios. And those are the types of people we want to be able to work with, are the HVAC mechanical suppliers, right? That's probably one of our biggest strategic partners in the buildings we work in. Is they're a major stakeholder. We don't have people on the road, on the ground. We don't have necessarily those mechanical service expertise per se in those exact instances where you may need someone on site. So we make sure that we work with those networks of mechanical suppliers that every single building has, make sure that we can deliver them value. We're making their job easier, making their business model more efficient for them, so that everybody is winning in the end. But I would say we don't work in commercial. We don't work in municipal, universities, schools, hospitals. We really understand our customer really well. Yeah. We understand the nuances that multi-residential building owners deal with and what condominium corporations or co-ops deal with. And we really focus our product and our efforts of service around that customer. And that's a big differentiator. And that's what I'm really excited about, is continuing to build a better product and a better service that really bring a cohesive value to all the stakeholders in that market.
Cool. Well, this has been fascinating for me. I've been digging into different verticals. A couple of weeks ago, I was deep down a rabbit hole with big box retail and refrigerated retail, and this has been kind of feeding me in that new way, which is how do all these same problems show up in these different ways in these different buildings? So thank you for taking me through that and educating me and everyone else, and really want to wish you luck on getting into the US and really expanding past that, because what you guys are doing is awesome. So thanks, Brad, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great, James.
All right, friends. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus podcast. For more episodes like this and to get the weekly Nexus newsletter, please subscribe at nexus.substack.com. You can find show notes for this conversation there as well. As always, please reach out on LinkedIn with any thoughts on this episode. I'd love to hear from you. Have a great day.